Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alan Popcotter, and you're listening to CallTalk for July 18th, 2018. Today's topic is fair trade outsourcing, sustainable, ethical, and profitable. If you are listening live, we invite you to be part of the show and ask questions. Here's how you do it. Email me at calltalk@benchmarkportal.com. I want to remind everyone that all of our shows are archived and available to listen to at benchmarkportal.com any time of the day. And now I'd like to introduce the host of Call Talk, Bruce Belfiore.
Thank you, Alan, and welcome back to Call Talk, everyone. You know, we all know that call centers are notoriously difficult places no matter where they're located. And employee attrition is oftentimes high. Absenteeism is a major problem, especially in many offshore outsourcing operations. Well, today we're going to talk with an industry visionary who is bringing what he calls fair trade outsourcing to the way these offshore outsourced call centers are managed and turn them into desirable workplaces. That person is Mike Dershowitz. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Bruce. I'm really excited to be here and show a little bit to the world about fair trade outsourcing.
Okay, great. Well, for our audience, Mike Dershowitz is the CEO of Rethink Staffing, a social impact outsourcing company that aims to make a measurable impact on the lives of people in developing populations. His idea is to put as many people as possible into impact sourcing work that pays people up to 3 times the poverty rate of the country they live in and provides them skills in a context that makes them more productive and more happy. This will eventually help them become capital owners and contribute to the economic development of their respective communities. Mike believes he can achieve this goal through social impact outsourcing, a managerial framework that he has developed based on impact sourcing and principles of social economics. So, with that, I'd like to, again, welcome you to the show and ask you a first question, Mike, which is, what's the philosophy behind fair trade outsourcing, and how does it work?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. That's a great start. And, you know, as a social economist, I really believe that entrepreneurs can help shape society to better take care of its people. You see a lot of business leaders questioning whether or not business's sole goal is to just make profit. There's a famous man in England back in the 18th century by the name of Robert Owen, whose ideas inspired me to create our own version of what he called New Harmony in my chosen industry, the outsourcing industry. I've come to call it fair trade outsourcing, which combines the principles of fair trade and impact sourcing and applies them to how call centers are managed today. So, you know, I really believe that to have a clear understanding of how fair trade outsourcing works, we need to look back at history. So in the 1790s, it was the height of the Industrial Revolution in England, and capitalists at the time who were solely focused on profit ran their mills really as sweatshops. Long hours, dangerous working conditions, and low pay. Child labor was very, very common, and drunkenness at work was expected. It was really hell on earth. But there was a textile mill owner in Scotland named Robert Owen who had a different vision. Owen's mills were safe, they were well-functioning, and they were full of the most modern machinery and safety precautions of the day. In other mills, 12 to 16-hour days were common, but Owen actually invented the 8-hour workday, and he summarized his philosophy of what he wanted for his workers as 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of leisure, and 8 hours of rest. Owen eventually showed us that an almost symbiotic relationship exists between worker satisfaction and revenue growth. I'm a big devotee of Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize-winning economist who founded Grameen Bank, is often called the banker to the poor. And in his latest book, A World of Three Zeros, Yunus makes a similar point, and he discusses specifically how to reduce global youth unemployment by saying that humans will and always will yearn to be productive, creative, and to progress throughout their lives. This drive, really inherent in humanity, to create and be productive leads to external gains in the economy and for the individual, such as increased income and ultimately greater profits. And so contemporary ideas like impact sourcing and agent happiness are built on these philosophies that try and combine the power of labor and capital symbiotically to produce results that surpass people's expectations. You know, we've all heard of the company who just seems to be able to do it in a way that its competitors can't. We often call them the most admired companies. And when you really peek under the hood, you'll see that what they've done is they've really figured out how to get the best out of their people in a way that makes their people the happiest. And so Owen's ideas are pretty historical, and they ended up being very sustainable, ethical, and are they profitable? The answer is hell yeah. In fact, in a lot of cases, treating your people well is more profitable than treating them poorly. So Owen's lessons, he taught us a number of different things, but the first thing was that he knew that humans inherently wanted to progress in their lives. So in his mills, he started training programs that taught them skills other than the rote mill work. That was the only means of making a living for the poor, uneducated classes. He eventually started building entire communities for his workers so he could ensure their health and safety. He gave them housing, he built them schools, and eventually churches. And Owen realized that if his workers felt safe at work, could advance in their lives, and feel valued, they would be happier, more productive, and take more ownership of their work. And they would be rewarded with economic and personal progress, and he would be rewarded for making the conditions for their success possible. Because of that, his mill quickly grew to be one of the largest, most productive and profitable in England by 1810.
That's
me,
great. I was just going to say that's great background and really a great lesson too. I mean, I think humans, in general, as they go through different stages of development, need to come to terms with how progress is actually metabolized and then actually optimized. And certainly he did that in terms of the Industrial Revolution. If you take the case of Italy that I'm very familiar with, about a century or so later, a guy named Camillo Olivetti did something similar in northern Italy to make sure that his workers were taken well care of. It was, if you were a parent, then that was taken into account. The housing was something that the company took care of, but it wasn't a company town type of thing where they tried to keep you in. They just tried to keep you progressing. So all very, very interesting things, and things that in terms of management practices in contact centers today can bring home a lot of the management lessons that we try to do, but we don't always do as well as we could. Let me let you finish there, and I'll ask you to, how this can be applied specifically to our industry.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Owen's ideas are just as applicable today as they were 2 centuries ago. Even though we now have sophisticated techniques and computing power that gives us great models, that we've tried to develop to manage our resources for results, we sort of continue to ignore the value that employees bring to the organization at the most basic level. We kind of ignore their humanity sometimes, and it's kind of sadder that one of the most people-intensive industries in the world, call centers, are really kind of can be some of the worst culprits of this type of neglect. And so, as we look forward to the type of management techniques that really work, we see a number of things, but certainly, first and foremost is safety at work, positive work environment, and then ultimately, fair pay. And to me, fair trade is, we call it fair trade because the fair trade movement really came out of this concept of, producers and suppliers working together to set equitable pricing for goods in markets. And for us, that means making sure that call center agents are paid in a way that doesn't make them, really poor or underprivileged in some format in their economies, in their respective societies. And so we do a lot with benchmarking pay and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. And so there's this combination of the culture. I think a lot of what you talk about goes to culture that really needs to start at the top in terms of a vision of the kind that you have, and that probably needs to be thought about by more leaders in our industry. And then the basics, which are compensation and communication and how all these things are brought across to people. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially I think in today's environment, unless the people at the top, whether it's the director of a call center or even above, unless they have the courage to say, look, we need to treat people in a certain way, in a better way, in order to really achieve the goals of our business and to really help serve our customers, I don't think it changes. Culture is, they say, I once heard a very famous quote that, if you don't, as a business leader, if you don't build your company's culture, your people will build it for you, and it won't be what you want, and certainly won't be what you like. Right. And so it does have to start from the top, and that's why, at least for us, it made sense to really build the company around that concept of fair trade. So. Mm-hmm.
And that concept of fair trade was clearly communicated to the agents and to the supervisors, other people in the center. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's very easy for us to communicate it these days because all they have to do is ask their friends. Mm-hmm. These days, people ask. I think if you're a call center manager, especially if you're in a geographic area where you compete for call center, for agents, for labor, your reputation is everything. And if there's bad stuff on the street about you, people are going to hear about it. I think in the developing world, especially in certain parts of the world where societies in general are more communal, and we're definitely talking about Southeast Asia and South Asia, in those societies, people talk to people all the time. And so if you've got a bad rep on the street, people are going to hear about it. And honestly, Bruce, I mean, I'm talking from experience because when we first got into this industry, I think our ideas were pure, but our methods hadn't really been developed. And we made mistakes. And, we made mistakes in hiring managers that we didn't give clear direction to, that unfortunately didn't have good hearts, and they caused some trouble. And we had to take some drastic action to repair, and we did. And in seeing us treat other agents or people well, that's how our culture gets enforced. So when I talk to my learning and development people, I tell them, look, it's your job to communicate the information and make sure that there's enough of it in people's heads so that when they live the culture on a day-to-day basis with their managers, with their colleagues, in doing their jobs, they can see those examples happening in real life, in real time. And until they experience a piece of your culture, they don't really understand the company culture. But if you don't do the work up front to know what it is and to communicate it, they're not going to know, and they're not going to recognize it when it happens.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And some of the things that work with call centers in this country, which are, for instance, making sure you have very good lines of communication with senior managers, open door, make sure that people understand what the metrics are that they're looking at, what the accountability is, and asking them for their input so that they actually become part of the process. In the kind of context that you're talking about overseas, and I know that you're particularly familiar with the Philippines, is it the same thing? Have you found that the same techniques are the ones that create engagement, that make it so that people do feel part of it and part of a culture that's lifting them up?
So we at Rethink Staffing, we have a core piece of our culture which we call the Agent Bill of Rights, and it is it is really 10 statements, 10 rights that I wrote to try and communicate what we were promising our agents at our core. And right number 5 is your managers will listen to you, and hear what you have to say. And so we felt so strongly about the communication aspect that we enshrined it as a right for our agents. And that honestly has made one of the biggest differences in the world, to the point where when we do employee sat surveys, we hear the fact that managers actually listen as core. So I don't think in this day and age a people-heavy company can survive without transparent and clear communication, both from the bottom up and the top down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I guess to fully answer your question, it doesn't matter where in the world that company is. Because at our core, humans are intelligent, incredibly perceptive beings, and they need to know what's going on. Otherwise, they'll go someplace where they do know what's going on.
Right. One of the things, we did a survey, or a bunch of surveys actually. We did a study that involved 5,000 agents, and one of the key things that came through was, in terms of culture and in terms of contentedness, was trust. And if you dig down into trust, a big part of that is communication, and communication that's consistent and that people can rely on in terms of, what they're thinking about you and how they're planning their lives and how they're feeling about the company. So really interesting. Now, Mike, you've been doing this for some time now. One of the things that your philosophy wants to promise is sustainability and profitability, along with the ethical component of it. So are the results sustainable, ethical, and profitable? And can you tell us about that claim?
So, to be honest, we didn't really expect this philosophy to be delivering the results it is this soon. We've really only been at this in this framework, about 30 months. And I know that, there are people listening that have been in the industry for 30 years. And so, we have this young man. I want to tell you this brief story. We have this young man working for one of our pioneering accounts for nearly, I guess he's been with us about 3 years now. He's not a college graduate, which is a big deal for Filipino employers, right? They want everyone to be college graduates. And his monthly salary is 1.7 times that of the minimum wage in the Philippines, which is good, for a call center. But because of his hard work, even at just 1.75 times that of the minimum wage, he was actually able to save enough money to buy the land that he and his family have been working on. That he and his family have actually been working as rice farmers, as tenant rice farmers in one of the provinces in the Philippines. And now he's actually earned enough money and saved enough where, he's built a concrete home for his family to replace the worn down nipa hut, which is kind of a native hut with temporary materials, where he and his family lived for all of his life. And what I'm most proud of about this young man is that after he got done with that, after he got done with, buying the land for his family and giving them, and making them more sustainable farmers and building them a house that doesn't blow over every time there's a typhoon, he then actually put up his own microcredit business, offering small loans to neighboring farmers. And now he's earning, he and his family are earning substantial profit from the land that they're farming, but he's also helping to ease the financial burdens of people in his community because he's not charging the usurious rates that the moneylenders in these rural communities charge. He's charging, kind of standard rates inside the Philippine economy. And so, the thing that I think people don't understand about the potential for the call center industry is that when you give somebody a job that is benchmarked against that minimum wage, when the minimum wage is the only other option they have, when you're able to pay them X times the minimum wage, that is such a strong economic driver that it's like this domino effect on how a small, really low risk investment in a low income economy can result to generate significant social and economic gains in the life of our agents, their families, and then by extension their respective communities. I bring this young man up all the time because, he's the kind of micro lending little business that actually, again, Muhammad Yunus, a person I admire greatly, promoted through Grameen Bank. And he founded it on the principles of trust and solidarity. And it works incredibly well in close-knit communities like the Philippines because everybody knows each other. So, when you see call centers, and if we build them on this concept of impact sourcing, like what we were able to do for this young man, through our call center job, it really helps to build these deep connections between one another, between the people in this community. And this then fosters that sense of solidarity and trust. So if we can create solidarity and trust, what we get in return is a much higher level of work ownership. And that high level of work ownership is the key. And so this is a long way of saying, if you treat people well, as a call center manager, what you get is much more ownership and work. And for those call center managers that are listening, we all know what I'm talking about. I don't have to go into detail. That, in call centers that struggle, work ownership, caring about work is low. And so inherently, we come to the starting gate with a client, meaning that our people are going to do their darndest to serve that client, and by extension, that's client's customers. And not only do we see it in higher productivity and higher quality rates of work, but most tangibly, which is comparable across accounts, is that we see, historically low absenteeism and attrition rates. And both for Rethink Staffing over the last 2 years has been, 10 times below the industry average. And, we know to a large extent, I don't think we've proven it to the level of specificity or of statistical truth that, you could probably do for us, Bruce, but, we know that there is that direct connection between our philosophy, our application of that philosophy, and these results. And so to me, that really shows how we can be sustainable, ethical, and really profitable. And I think if other companies and other call centers think about that philosophy and work to apply it, I think they'll get similar results.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Great insights. And, one of the things I was thinking about was you were talking about the community and sense of community that exists in some other places. But what's happened with social media is it's not exactly the same kind of community, certainly, but it has created community, and it's created buzz, and it's created, the means by which people communicate with each other and get the word out. And as call center managers, there's all kinds of implications to that. Obviously, we won't get into them here. But one of the ones that you were talking about was how it has a big impact on reputation in places like the Philippines because people talk to each other. And the same thing is true for managers in the United States, in Europe, or wherever they may be listening from. Because of the existence of social media, because that will create community and communication that either is going to be positive or is going to be negative. And if it's negative, it's going to have a negative impact on you in terms of the kind of hiring you can do and the kind of culture that you can build, which you've talked about so well here. That's great. Well, before we go to listener questions, is there any other point that you'd like to bring up, Mike?
I guess the one thing I want to say to everyone is that I don't necessarily think we've changed the formula for managing people, that significantly. I think we still, at our core, we're still a call center. We're still an outsourced call center. We still apply industry best practices when it comes to things like IT and compliance, and as well as other things we use to motivate people, like performance bonuses or individual contests or things like that. But I think what we do is that we've built it on this sort of trusting and empathetic really framework. And more than anything else, we always ask, hey, what's going on in our agents' lives? And instead of asking, are they having a problem at home? Is somebody sick? We ask those questions, but we also say, what's going on in their economic lives? Really, as an actor in their society, in their economy, how are they doing? And so I do want to talk about quickly a project that I've recently greenlighted that I'm really excited about, which is, transportation in the developing world is a core driver of absenteeism, and it's also a huge insecurity when it comes to how people live their lives, relying on public transportation. And it really spends a lot of time. And so we're currently raising funds to actually start our own microcredit program to buy our employees a small batch of motorcycles for them to use in their daily use. And the idea is to let our agents ride the bikes while they pay off the cost bit by bit without interest. And it'll really give them a lot of extra time in their day. You know, some agents, even though they may only live, 4 miles or 5 miles from the office on public transportation in the developing world, that could be an hour and a half commute. And so, we think that this is a small amount to make a huge impact and a worthy investment in their future. So we're always looking for things like that. And it's because we look at the economics of what's going on in their lives.
Very cool. And when you think about it, the kind of thing that Owens did and that Olivetti did in terms of trying to figure out what are those basic needs, and maybe a little bit more than the basic needs that people have that you could make it easier for them to actually acquire, because sometimes there's simply barriers to acquiring it, what you're trying to do with transportation and that sort of thing. Very, very good. Very good to hear. I was thinking I did a webinar yesterday that was calling Measuring Your Culture. And really, there are ways to actually do that. And I think you're on to some very exciting ways of doing that. Well, with that, let's turn things over to Alan a second. And I think he's got a question or two from the listeners. Alan?
Yes, we got a couple questions in, and this one is from Lisa. If we are an in-house contact center, can we apply the same principles you talk about?
Yeah, I think actually in-house contact centers probably have more freedom than outsourced contact centers would, because you've probably only got one set of decision makers to convince, whereas an outsourced call center may have their own internal management and then client management, to convince if changes are to be made. Outsourced contact centers also can get squeezed by their contract arrangements. So the first thing I would say is yes, absolutely you can. I think you'll have an easier go at it than we necessarily do. I mean, we certainly turn down business frequently because people are asking us to operate in a way that we don't believe in. And so you can. And I would tell you that the first thing to do is to take a look at your compensation structure and benchmark it against your local community. I think I've sat in front of a few contact center agents when I ask them, what they pay. Nobody pays the federal minimum wage anymore. That's not realistic. But even if you're paying in the U.S., $9 an hour, $10 an hour, you may or may not be surprised to learn that at $9 or $10 an hour, that that person is a member of the working poor in most places in the United States. And so, like it or not, you're employing poor people. And you may not think of them that way, and they may not appear that way, but economically, that's the truth. And that poor person has a lot of other challenges and hurdles in their lives that, the rest of us don't. And, I would encourage you to be thinking about how do you get them out of being poor. And, you'd be surprised what an hour or two, $1 or $2 an hour raise can really do economically, to someone that's poor. So.
And, if you need a justification for that, beyond the social and all that sort of thing, if you're worried about the bean counters, and let's face it, Mike, in the contact center field, we have people who tend to be right-brained, who tend to be people, et cetera. For many of them, the worst day in the year is when they have to go in and talk to those bean counters on budget matters. And the reason, I'm very sensitive to this issue is because I come out of the finance world, but have now been totally enamored with the world of customer contact. And so I see this clash of cultures going on all the time. And if you have high turnover, and if you're able to make a case that, in fact, you could reduce that turnover, turnover is extremely expensive, and it's very few centers that actually compute the cost of turnover. If you actually compute the cost of turnover, and we've done that with many of our clients, you can find that maybe raising your wages will in fact bring down the turnover and will in fact save you money in the long run. So
Yeah.
Anyway.
Dead on. Well, yeah, I want to extend that, Bruce, because that's a dead on point. And to kind of show you the sort of efficacy of that idea, of the idea of fair pay, or in the United States paying a living wage. We don't. Most call center contracts are written such that the vendor pays for attrition. The client doesn't pay for attrition, right? It's the vendor's responsibility to train new people and get them, to a productive place so that the client has a seamless experience. Well, we've gotten to the point where we won't take those terms in new contracts. We won't take terms where we have to retrain because we deliver, a very low attrition rate. And so whether you're an internal contact center manager or an external, there are true financial gains to be had. Bruce, you're absolutely right, by attacking that attrition rate, by giving people a living wage. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Alan, do we have any more questions? I think maybe we have time for one more question before we end the session, but this has been fabulous.
Yes, we have another one from James. He says, how do you measure economic and social progress for your agents?
So we measure economic and social progress in a bunch of different ways, but the core one is, you've got to understand really, two key metrics when it comes to compensation. So I'm going to focus on compensation because I know we don't have a lot of time. Number one is, what's the minimum wage? Right? If you're in the United States, even if you're outside the United States, a call center job should not be and cannot be a minimum wage job. You just won't attract the type of people that can be successful. The other thing you have to benchmark against is the poverty rate. Okay? When you are paying at or below the poverty rate, you are engendering problems into your workforce that you may not know or understand. For example, most people living, at poverty in whether it's in the developing world or in more economically challenged places in the United States, they're not going to be able to afford reliable transportation. They're going to have other challenges in their lives or in their family unit that is going to spill over and cause absenteeism. There are other things like that just don't happen when you have enough money to afford the basics. Health, of course, is an issue. We've all heard about these food deserts, they call them in the inner cities. So first and foremost, think about compensation, think about and benchmark it. All this data is available. You just have to go to the Labor Department's website. All this data is available for your local area, so you can know. But again, if you do nothing else, ask, what's the minimum wage and what's the poverty rate in my area, and really see where your pay measures.
Okay, that's great. One of the things actually that I could insert here too is the compensation issue can sometimes become a source of a lot of creativity. You have to be careful with it. But for instance, there was one situation where we had a client that was in an area that was growing. There were more call centers coming in. They were losing people to a 50 cent an hour greater wage down the road type of thing. And one of the things that they did was to empower people to increase their own wages by a formula that has to be very carefully constructed. But if it's done properly, and if you have the actual tools to do it properly, can be very exciting, because an agent who is able to do things like reduce their average handle time, not by pushing people off the phone and getting them upset, but rather by being coached and trained in call handling and in efficient call closure, at the same time keeping up the customer satisfaction side of things, can actually be a way that you can split the difference. In other words, you can actually cause that person to become more productive. They can have more in their paycheck, and they can actually see where it's coming from and why. And they're also at the same time being monitored with regard to the quality aspects that you want, and adherence aspects that you want them to have. So without going into a lot of detail, if you put together attendance on a monthly basis, for instance, attendance, adherence, and their average handle times, and their quality scores, which have to be right down to the agent level in order for this whole scheme to work, then you can have a situation in which they will be able to actually impact their own their own salaries, their own pay, bring home more at the end of the month, and feel empowered to actually do a better job. So anyway, that was just a thought there. Well, this has been fabulous.
It's true, and I
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Bruce. I do have to kind of say one quick thing about that. As a bit of a cautionary tale for managers, working on incentive programs, do keep in mind that, if salaries, if those incentive factors are too large a percentage of salaries in an agent, in a position of a call center agent, people are still going to try and fit the budget into the minimum that they're going to earn, right? And again, we go back to the principle: if the minimum is too low against the local poverty rate or minimum wage, you're actually going to end up shooting yourself in the foot, which is what you said. You got to craft it very carefully, because then people, could get just sort of buried, by their inability to, or by their need to achieve the formula in order just to make their basic bills. So that, that psychology is a little bit of a boomerang effect. It can work great, or it can, it can really hurt you in a negative way. So.
It does. It needs to be sort of implemented in the right way, in the right places, and with the right systems. Because the other thing is, if, for instance, your systems are not giving you the right information on those agents, and they start not trusting it, then you've just ruined it all. So that's why I say it has to be really carefully done. But since we're, one of the things about this program is we explore ideas. This has been a fabulous episode because, Mike, you've helped us to explore something in a whole new way. Really thank you for sharing this information, because you've sort of brought us into an unusual area for a lot of call center managers in terms of the discussions we have, but also sort of sharing your vision on how new realities can be made while keeping your feet on the ground in terms of all those things that we have to do as managers. So thanks very much for that. Are there any last things you'd like to say before we hand things over to Alan?
No, I just, thank you very much. It was great to be here. You and I have had great discussions, at PACE conferences, and thank you for holding me intellectually accountable at times. So this was great. I'm glad that we were able to do this, and I'll look forward to our next, very lively debate. Okay,
and I'm going to share with our listeners too that you're actually in Germany right now. So really, you went above and beyond in terms of being available for this. We really appreciate it, Mike.
Not a problem. It's been a pleasure, and and certainly I'm in Berlin right now, which has had a lot of great ideas and thinkers, here, both good and bad, through the centuries, and so it's very inspiring. And so I'll keep doing what I'm doing, and hopefully your listeners and folks can take some of it and improve their own situations.
Okay, good. Have a bratwurst on us. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, we'll hand things over to Alan now.
Thanks again to Mike Dershowitz and Bruce Belfiore for your insightful discussion on today's show. Be sure to join us next month for another great show, or look at our huge selection of archived shows and topics at benchmarkportal.com. Then click on CallTalk, where you'll find over 8 seasons of this show. From all of us at Benchmark Portal, keep those headsets steady and your fingers ready. This is Alan Pockhotter signing out. Have a great day.